Okay, I am gonna record this so I can post it to the web. Um, I'm gonna try and do it like Trent does mentoring Mondays. So I don't have that all set up yet, guys, but I'm working on it. So it'll be up on my personal website under the Learn menu. I'm just gonna put it right here, charting the Northwest Passage. So I'll work on that and I'll get a link up. So thank you for coming tonight. I'm gonna try and keep these short. I'm going to try and keep them to 30 to 45 minutes just so they don't become a burden on everybody. Um, but thanks to Kyle, we're going to have some roundtable discussions about business on a particular theme. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about kind of ballpark estimates, napkin math. Um, I found over the last few years that that has become a really vital skill just to quickly determine if an opportunity is even worth talking about with a potential client. And what made me think about this is I had this actually came up a few weeks ago. I had somebody reach out to me with what sounded like a phenomenal opportunity, and I just started doing some napkin math, and I was like, man, turns out that is a major money losing proposition. And so one of the things I've gotten a lot better about the last 5 years is just not putting together as many proposals, which sounds like a bad thing, but actually can be a good thing. You want to be putting together proposals with a high success rate, right? I don't know how many proposals my company did in 2024. I think it was under 30. Now, a lot of people would be like, wow, that's not very much. But I was super happy with that because, I don't know what our hit rate was. It was 1 out of 3, maybe, which is a pretty good hit rate. It's a pretty good hit rate. Now, those are circumstances where we actually create a proposal folder and we're probably preparing a scope. We do a lot of what I call informal proposals or email proposals. But essentially what I'm trying to do there is kick people a order of magnitude number and see if they freak out. And maybe we'll talk a little more in a future episode about kind of about how I use email proposals. But I've gotten a lot better. I just when you go through the needs discovery process and prepare scope, you're giving away a lot of value there. And I've just gotten more picky about who I do that with. So the way that relates to what we're going to talk about for the next 30, 40 minutes is, you want to be able, if a client has a budget or you think you have an idea of what they might want to spend, the ability to quickly do some napkin math and find out if it's even feasible is productive because you don't want to go through all the work of preparing a detailed proposal if it's not worth it. And so I'm going to try and just talk to you about some quick ways you can do that, and we'll look at a couple examples. But yeah, it's an important skill. So before I dive into that, since this is the first time we're getting together as a group, thank you everybody for coming. I know some people aren't on Facebook. They just got the Zoom link. So let me just briefly explain real quick um, what the purpose is and what I hope to accomplish. So I was going to try and do this weekly, and then I realized today like that my life may not be conducive to that. I don't want to go to every other week yet, but I'll just warn you guys, like, I may occasionally be in the field or something happens on a Tuesday. So you guys just have to give me a hall pass, 1 week a month. And so we'll try that and see how it works. Um, and then, the name of this is charting the Northwest Passage. And basically the reason I picked that name is there are no silver bullet solutions here, right? There's a lot of trade-offs. And, I tell my folks, it's like kind of groping around to find your keys in the dark. And it's really hard. And for the last 5 years, I've got my butt kicked. Having said that, I wish there were some things that somebody would have told me 5 years ago, and I probably could have saved myself some pain and also my employees some pain. So the goal of this is to kind of provide some of that lessons learned to either guys or gals that are either running their own business or especially people that might be thinking about it, right? So that's kind of the goal. So no silver bullet solutions here. I don't have all the answers. And the nice thing about this, one of the things that Kyle and I talked a little bit about is this will be a little more interactive than the podcast, I hope. So we'll be able to ask questions and kind of bounce things off of each other. And so we'll see how it goes. All right. So that's kind of the purpose. So I'm going to tell you about a call I got. Actually, it was a message on LinkedIn. It's a gentleman I know who will remain anonymous. We'll call him Tony. That's not his real name, but we'll call him Tony. So Tony called me, and I've never met Tony. We're not friends, but I follow him on LinkedIn, and he's a kind of a tech savvy guy. He's not a licensed surveyor, but he's tech savvy, and he's into geospatial stuff. And so I follow him, and we've messaged a couple times, and he likes my stuff on LinkedIn, and I liked his stuff. I like his stuff on LinkedIn. He knows we fly UAVs, so he called me or he messaged me on LinkedIn this a couple months ago, and he said, "Hey, I've got a job in California, and I need some help with some people like you. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Sure, I'm always willing to have a conversation." And he said, "All right, like go on this Google web form and fill out this form." So I pulled up the form, and I'm like, yeah, like I don't have 45 minutes to fill this form out. Like, I have no idea what this guy wants help with, right? um, so I kind of pinged him back and was like, "Hey, not quite sure I'm ready to fill out the form. Like, can we talk a little bit about like what you like what do you got going on like before I go invest some time in that?" And he's like, "Sure, yeah." So here's what he told me. He said, I'm trying not to laugh. He said, "I have 1 million overhead utility poles that I need to inspect via UAV in Southern California." And he had a relatively short period of time to do that. Okay, so the first thing I'm thinking is 1 million utility poles is a lot of utility poles. I mean that's a big number. So I don't know how long it takes to count to 1 million. Like if you count one digit a second, like I don't know how long it takes you to count to 1 million. I haven't Googled it, but that's a lot. So my very first thought was that's a lot of utility poles, and then my second thought was, does somebody really have the money to do that properly? Like what's the budget on that? Right? Like what's the budget on that? Um, so I asked him. I said, "All right, yeah, 1 million polls is a lot." I said, "I'm not sure that we're your team. Like, if you don't need geospatial, if you're just looking for somebody to to fly a Mavic Mini and take pictures of utility poles, I'm not sure I'm the right team. I'm not sure we're the team for you, but I'm willing to have a conversation with you about it." I said, "What kind of budget are you working with?" And he says, "Well, I've got some guys that are making $1,000 a day flying poles for me on this job." Okay, so I don't know what your gut reaction to that is, surveyors, but my very first thought was $1,000 a day isn't anywhere near close to what my two-man field crew rate is for a day, right? So already out the gate, I'm thinking, yeah, this probably isn't going to work, right? But I'm like, all right. I was like, how much are you paying per pole? And let me just anybody want to guess what he's paying per pole? So drive to the pole. Oh, by the way, it's not a Mavic Mini. You have to have an Enterprise DJI drone. So there's some specific requirements for the drone, and then there's specific shots that you have to take of the pole. So drive to the pole, put your drone up, take the pictures, put the drone back in the box, go to the next pole. Okay, so does anybody want to take a guess of what he's paying per pole? It's okay if you don't. You want to guess, Kyle?
I'll go I'll go 100 per poll.
Okay, 100 per pole. That's a reasonable number, I think, Kyle, right? Like, and I don't know that you could make money at that necessarily as a survey company, but that seems in the ballpark. Okay, so he is paying, he tells me he's paying $5 a poll. Okay. So can you guys still see my notepad? Yeah. Okay. So here's what I wanted. I didn't want to open Excel, guys, because I didn't want to once you get Excel open, then you start like doing a real fee estimate, and I didn't want to do it. we're just gonna do some napkin math here, right? And then we'll go through a couple examples if we have time. So let's just do this first example. All right, so we got $5 per pole. So this is the napkin math I'm doing in my head while I'm talking to this guy, right? So $5 per pole. All right, he says he's got guys making $1,000 a day. So $1,000 per day at $5 a pole is 200 poles per day. Now, what I want to tell you guys when we're doing this napkin math is we're not trying to figure out like within 10% what this costs. What we want to know is like, is this even in the friggin' baseball stadium? Like, is this even remotely like right? Because here's what I find: 3/4 of the time, I can just eliminate a prospective client or opportunity because they're not even in the baseball stadium. And their real estate agent told them the survey should be $500. Like that's not even in the baseball stadium for me, guys, right? Okay, so 200 polls per day. So I start doing some math in my head. I'm like, all right, let's say you got a couple guys that will work 10-hour days. So you got to work, so 10-hour days. So you got 10-hour days. That means you got to fly. Somebody help me out with that. 20 pulls an hour, right? Okay, 20 pulls per hour. Okay, and it's 60, there's 60 minutes in an hour, right? So that means in order to make $1,000 a day, you got to be flying pull per one pull every 3 minutes. Okay, now we're gonna talk before we wrap up. We'll talk about you got to when you're doing this, you got to be able to identify your critical assumptions, and you usually have one or two critical assumptions that are gonna like bankrupt you or not, right? Okay, so we're gonna get to that in a minute, but here's what I start. I start doing this math in my head, and like if you've flown a UAV at all, you realize there is no freaking way you can fly a pole every 3 minutes. Now let's make a critical assumption here. So we're just going to say critical assumption. And maybe when you're doing your napkin math, this is what you do. Okay, critical assumption. One, the utility poles, the 200 utility poles you need to fly in a day are lined up in a row along the same country road. That's an assumption. Now, we don't know that. The reason that's a critical assumption is because what if your 200 poles are all over the north half of the county? Now, I don't know. We can assume they're flying every pole in their network if they're doing a million polls, but like that's going to be a critical assumption. Okay, and here's what I'm going to tell you. I don't know what's your typical spacing between poles, 100 feet or 75 feet. Okay, even if you got 75 feet or 50 feet between poles, like let's think about this, guys. You get your drone out, you put it up in the air. How many poles in a row can you fly before you're starting to push your line of sight? I don't know, like 10 poles, 20 poles, right? Or before you start having communication link problems, right? And so, like, I'm starting to do that math. I mean, like, I don't know, Kyle, you tell me what you think. Like, do you think one pole every 3 minutes is realistic?
Um, Probably not.
Probably, yeah, probably not, right? Like,
Probably not at all.
probably
But
not at all, right? So,
I don't have a drone. I don't know how fast your drone goes.
yeah, like, I don't know. Like, I mean, just based on what I'm thinking, I'm like, man, I think 10 minutes a pole is a little more realistic. Like, and even then, like everything's going right. Like the poles are lined up. You don't have a bunch of radio interference. You don't got to worry about flying over people. You got good line of sight, and you only need 2 or 3 shots per pole. By the way, I had no idea. Like, do they need 12 shots per pole or 2 shots per pole? Yeah, I didn't get any of this information. So, just based on that napkin math, I'm like, something doesn't make sense. So I call the guy back and I'm like, hey, I don't understand your math. I'm like, man, to make $1,000 a day at $5 a poll, Like I got it sounds to me like you got to fly a pole every 3 minutes. And he says, no, 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 no. He's like, these guys are working from sun up to sundown. I'm like, okay. Uh, my guys don't. I'm not gonna tell my guys they got to start flying at sunrise and fly till sundown. He's got a million poles. Like if you do that to a crew for a year, what's gonna happen? Like I don't know. You might not have a crew, right? So like in other words, and I don't know what's going on. Like so, did this guy not gut check his like, is he telling me it's fantasy? Does he really have guys that are flying 200 poles a day? Like, am I making some serious miscalculations here? So, like, all right, so I'm thinking, what is a realistic budget for this per day? So let's do some napkin math. So we're gonna say, all right, because I'm gonna push back on this guy. All right, let's say we can fly a pole every 10 minutes. One pole every 10 minutes. Okay, so we get 6 poles per hour, and I'm going to say 10-hour day. Now you got to remember, we're not counting drive time to and from the site, right? So I don't know, is there an hour or 2 hours of drive time back and forth from whatever the crew, the hotel to the, yeah, I don't know. So 10-hour day. Okay, so we can get 60 poles per day. All right, so at $5 a pole, times, what do we got there? 60 poles per day times $5 a pole. Doesn't sound like $1,000 day to me. Sounds like a $300 day to me. Okay, so here's the problem that this guy has. And I look, I suspect he called me because he can't find anyone else to do this work. That's my guess. Right? So, like, at $300 a day, am I even covering the fuel in the hotel? Like, forget about wages. Like, this isn't even realistic, right? So, like, I start doing some napkin math. Here's what I came up with. I'm thinking if I can get 60 polls a day to really make this worth my while with travel, I think I need $3,000 a day. Okay, so $3,000 a day divided by 60 polls a day equals $50 a poll. And like, I don't even know that I would take the work for that because this is like, I think this is ideal. This is like, I don't think you're going to get 60 polls every day. Is my guess, right? And I talked to another surveyor that does some of this, that he did some of this work, and he said, you know, if this guy's never done this work, what he doesn't realize is on projects like this, you typically have a 20% rejection rate by the utility, which means 1 out of 5 polls, you got to go revisit, refly, right? So we don't have any of this, like none of that times in there. So like, look, I like Kyle's number. I like $100 a poll. To me, that sounds like a number I could maybe make work. Now, you get into this like, do you got 2 guys in the truck? Do you got 1 guy in the truck? Maybe you don't send them out in a truck. Maybe they're in a moped. Like you can tweak that number a little bit. But here's what I realized talking to this guy. Is he even in the baseball stadium? He's not even in the baseball stadium, guys, right? Like, so I didn't fill out the form. Right? Now, I don't know what happened here. This guy told me he already had this work under contract. Now, here's what might have happened. He might have heard, let's say he's getting $10 a poll and he's paying 5 to his subs. Okay, so here's what might have happened to this guy. Somebody called him and said, I need to fly a UAV over 1,000,000 polls and I'll pay you $10 a poll. And he didn't do the math. All he thought was $10 million. Right? He looked at that big bottom line number and was like, wow, $10 million, like that's 4 years revenue. And he might have signed a contract without really thinking this through. And so here's part of what I've learned where I don't typically get in serious financial trouble on small projects. I get in serious financial trouble on large projects. right? And some of this is because what I tell people is, if we screw up an estimate 10% on a $30,000 project, that's 3 grand. That's not going to bankrupt us. If we screw up 10% on a $3 million project, that's $300,000. That could bankrupt us, right? And so you got to be really careful. So, anyways, this is what made me think about it. Like, so yeah, you get a call from a guy on LinkedIn, and he's got 1 million poles he needs to fly with a UAV. Like, and he says, "I'm paying $5 a pole." Like, you got to be able to do some napkin math and understand that that's not a super great opportunity, right? Yeah, I've got another example I want to give you guys that's a little more survey related, but a little more complicated. But has anybody else had a situation like this come up? Where you're just doing some napkin math and you're like, this doesn't even pencil. Okay, so I'm going to give you my other example. So I had somebody come up, they want some right-of-way surveying. They want land, basically what we call a record land net. So they want a record land net so they can prepare plats and legals for right-of-way acquisition. Okay, and they have 2 routes. So they've got a 9 mile route on one project, and they've got a 13 mile route. Let's just do the 9 mile route. So they had a 9 mile route and they had a 13 mile route, 2 different project sites. This is in central Nevada, and the elevation is about 5,000 feet. Okay. Now, look, we don't have to know very much to just do some napkin math on this. Okay. I really didn't even have to do the napkin math because I've done it. This is the kind of work I did the first 12 years of my career. And I already knew that the client wasn't realistic. Okay. So, like, the client's telling me, so they say, hey, we got a 9 mile route and we've got $80,000 to figure out where our right, we need $80,000. We need plats and legals for, a record land net and plats legals for a 9 mile route. Okay, now, like, as soon as I saw that, I'm like, that ain't gonna work. Okay, so let's try and walk through that map. Now, we don't even have to necessarily go count parcels to figure this out. Okay, so let's assume we're in central Nevada, it's sectionalized, right? And it's subdivided to approximately the quarter section, maybe a little smaller. So let's just do some rough assumptions here. So typically those corridors are going to run down the section line, right? Or quarter section line. So they aren't going to run through the middle of a parcel. They typically run along the boundaries of a parcel because that's where the landowners don't want to right away run it through the middle of their parcel. So if we're running down a section line, and I'm telling you we're subdivided to the quarter or a little smaller, roughly how many parcels are we going to cross per section? 4, right? 2 on each side. Okay, so we've got 4 parcels per section. Okay, so now we got to ask ourselves, all right, record land net, so we don't have to fully resolve the boundary, but some of those parcels will have been surveyed and have monuments. Some won't. Some will just be output in the deed. Like, so we got to figure out, like, roughly how many monuments do we think we need to tie to put together.
Oh, you know why? Oh,
You all
okay.
right there, Seaver?
Oh, sorry about that, man.
That's
Yeah.
okay.
I don't know what you heard.
Not very much. You didn't curse me out or anything, so you're good.
No, I'm enjoying this. I'm paying attention.
Oh,
So,
okay, no problem.
yeah, yeah.
All right,
Sorry.
so, like, here's what I think to myself. Like, all right, at a minimum, guys, we got 3 monuments per mile because we got the section corners and the quarter corner in between. That's a minimum, right? And, like, I don't know, we're gonna have some other monuments, but so we got to come up with a number. So let's just say 6 monuments per mile. Okay, and we got to pull at least 4 deeds. We got to pull and review 4 deeds. Now we're going to separate this out. So, all right, 6 monuments per mile. I'm going to pick on Kyle. Kyle, assume it's fairly flat. It's not super rugged. We can use GPS. We can do fast static survey or PPK. Road access is reasonable. So I guess we should put on here flat, good GPS, good GNSS, terrain, reasonable road access. Let's say we're going to do a fast static survey Kyle. So we're going to set a couple bases and then we're going to do, I don't know, 20-minute or 30-minute sessions to tie these monuments to build our land net. How many monuments do you think you could tie two-man crew per day? Just give me a ballpark number. What do you think? Is it 3 or is it 12 or something in the middle?
Are you saying you're setting up a base essentially on each monument and just, leapfrogging as you go?
Yeah, so yeah, it's a good question. So what we would do is we usually set a couple bases, they run all day. And in this part of Nevada, they won't be stolen. You set a couple bases, they run all day, and then what we do is we call them rovers. We would run a rover or two, um, but they're taking fast static sessions. So let's assume it's just a two-man crew. We got a 10-hour workday. They're gonna set a base or two in the morning. They're gonna want run. We're gonna want run one mobile receiver for 20-hour fast static sessions, and then they got, let's say, an hour pickup at the end of the day. So what do you think?
I mean,
There's no wrong answer.
I think you'd be lucky to get and I'm also my problem is I'm over optimistic in terms of my time and how long
Sure.
it take other people, but I think you'd be lucky to get a monument an hour.
Okay, so Kyle picked up on a couple great things here, which is why we're doing this meetup. And one is like you always underestimate field surveys. Always. I've been doing it 25 years. I always underestimate it. Like I don't know how many times in my career I've finished a job and been like, man, that field work went way faster than we thought. Like, I don't know if that has ever come out of my mouth. Right? It's like there's always conditions on the ground that are like something, not every job, but a lot of jobs, right? Like that's what happens. So you know what, Kyle, you know what I was gonna say? I was gonna say 1 10-hour day for 6 months. Like I'm not that far off your number, I don't think. So um let's just say one day. So we'll say 1 day for every 6 monuments. Okay, so now we can start doing some math. I told you we have 9 miles. 9 miles at 6 mons per mile is 54 mons or be 9 days, right? 9 days of a two-man crew. Okay, so now we can start putting some rough ballpark numbers together. Now, look, we're staying out of town because it's in the middle of nowhere, Nevada. We're staying out of town. We probably got an hour drive to and from the project site. So I'm going to say, look, those are 12-hour days. We got to pay per diem. We got the travel, the hotel. I mean, we usually try and bonus our guys out a little bit if they're out of town. We try and pay them a little extra. So I mean, I don't want to collude on prices here, but let's just say we've got a $3,200 a day travel rate for two-man crew, 4 GPS receivers. That's everything. That's the hotel, the per diem, all that stuff, the bonus. Now, that's not our actual number, but that's ballpark. Now, look, if you're in Mississippi, we could have guys from all over the country. If you're in Mississippi, your number might be half that. But where I'm at in California, that's what it takes to put a two-man crew out of town. Okay, with all the gear and the truck and everything. All right. So we already know if we got 9 days at $3,200. I don't want to try and do that math in my head because it's the end of the day. 9 times 3,200. Okay, so just to get the field work done, we're going to call it 28K. Now, that doesn't include any of the initial work you got to do for the control. You need to, we'd probably go out and do a fast static network and set 2 or 3 bases. All right. Okay, so then we got to do map research, map and deed research. We got to review deeds. We got to COGO those deeds, right? Like I'm running out of time, but let's come up with some rough numbers. I'm going to say, all right, per section or per mile, how many days of a survey tech? I don't know, like let's say per mile we've got a half a day to a day of research, a half a day of COGO, and we got to put together the record. We got to put the deed, the COGOs on the monuments, make sure everything's scaled and rotated properly. We got to take some notes. I don't know. It feels like somewhere between 2 and 4 days of office time at a minimum for a tech. So let's split the difference. Let's just say 3 days per mile for research, COGO, what we call a record land net. I think that might be light. All right. Let's say we've got at my office, I put a 5 year survey tech on that. She could probably we have a young lady that's been working for us for 5 years. She could probably do most of this without a bunch of hand holding. Like she's my most expensive employee outside of the principals. I don't know. Let's just say we're paying her $120 an hour for a survey tech or experienced survey tech.
Paying or charging out?
I'm sorry, charging out. Yeah, she wishes she made $120 an hour. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, and she's working 8 hour days. So she's got, so let's just see what we got there. So we got 8 times 120. So she's $960 a day. Let's just make the math easy, $1,000 a day. And I think we've got 3 days per mile. So we've got 3 days per mile times 9 miles equals 27 days. So we got 27K. Okay, so here's the problem we got already. We're at 60K. And by the way, I think this is light. I think it's probably closer to 5 days per mile. So I think that's light. But we're at 60K. And we haven't written any plat and legals yet. Like, all we have right now is a record land net. Okay, so let's just I don't want to go over time. Let's just wrap up. So we can use these same baseline assumptions. So if we've got 4 parcels per section, so 4 parcels per section, okay, that means we need 4 plats and legals per section at a minimum. You got to remember, sometimes there's TCEs and other kinds of things, but let's just say pure right-of-way takes, we got 4 parcels per section, so we need 4 takes, 4 LDPs per section. I don't know, to put together a technically correct strip description and a plat. I don't know, somewhere between 12 and 24 hours. I don't know. Let's see. I think I went a little light up here, so let's go a little heavy. Let's go a little heavy down here. So I'm gonna copy this same math. I'm gonna say we got the same young lady doing our plats and legals. She's $1,000 a day. I'm gonna say 3 days per LDP, land description package. Okay, so that means we've got 12 days per mile. So 12, sorry guys, 12K per mile. This is for plats and legals, so this is LDPs. All right, and we got, how many miles do we got? We got 9 miles. All right, so let's do that math. 108 grand. Okay, so let's see what our total. This is just napkin math ballpark. All right, so we've got and if you got a client that's going to get serious, you would really go in and spend some time on this, right? Like you would pull some parcel data and you'd look at the road access and you'd give this some more thought. We just want to know, are these people even in the baseball stadium? Right? Okay, so we got 28,000 up top for some field work. Then we think we've got 60K to put together a record land net, and then we've got 108K to do plats and legals. Oop. Sorry, 88,000 plus 108. Oh man, I keep okay, $200,000. Now look, somebody calls me up on the phone, even if they're in a rural part of the Western United States, and they want 9 miles of right-of-way mapping with plats and legals. That just feels to me like $250,000. Just based on my experience, it feels like $250,000 to $500,000. Like, here's the problem I got when this client called. Like, they're not even in the ballpark. Like why? How much time am I going to spend with this client? Now, here's what happened. I actually called the client back. And I said, hey, I'm just running some rough numbers. Like, I don't even think you guys are even close to what it's going to take to do this properly. And do you know what the client said? They said, I'd never worked with this client before. They said, you're right. We've never really done a project like this before. We need some help figuring this out. Okay, well, yeah, I knew that. Like, my guess is these guys had, they weren't a Department of Transportation. This is like a hedge fund in New Jersey that's like getting into the infrastructure game in Central Nevada, and like they've never acquired right of way like this, right? And so you can see how now. Look, here's the reality. We came up with a number. What did we come up with, guys? 196. So here's what I told the client. I said, look, I don't know if it's 250K. It could be 190K or it could be 310K. What I know is it's not 80K, right? That's how these ballpark numbers help, right? Like, look, I tell the client sometimes, like, look, I can get you typically with just some napkin math, I can get you plus or minus 25%. Now there's still a 50% band there, right? But I can just, without even looking at anything, I can do some napkin math based on my experience and get you with plus or minus 25% of a realistic number, right? And so part of what I wanted to talk about tonight is I think that's a really vital skill when you either start your own business, or even, maybe a few years before you start your own business, when you're proposing on work at a company, or you got to be able to do this. Like, somebody calls me up and is like, Landon, I got 10 miles of land net I need in Central Nevada, and then I need plats and legals for a 50-foot right of way. Like, in my head, I'm like, that's not $20,000. It's not $20 million. Like, I can put some order of magnitude numbers together, right? And here's one of the reasons why I think that's so important. And we can talk more about this, is like, you get into a situation where you are under contract with a client with a completely unrealistic budget. Nobody wins in that situation. The client doesn't win. You don't win. None of the other project partners win. Like, I have this conversation with clients sometimes. I tell them, like, they're like, well, we found a guy that he's going to do it for 20% of your price. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think you should hire that surveyor. Like, you can hire that surveyor, but like, look, let's say I don't have a doubt in my mind. Kyle's probably not as expensive as I am. My guess, just the kind of company he is. Like, look, if a client called me up and said, hey, we got a price from Kyle on this Alta survey, and Kyle was 80% of your price, or he was 75% of your price. You know what I would tell my client? Hire Kyle, right? Kyle's running a smaller shop, and his overhead's not as much, and like,
Okay, maybe a small one.
oh, there's Steve.
Yeah.
Kyle can probably do a good job at that price, right? Here's what I tell a client though. When a client calls up and says, Kyle said he would do it for 20% of your price, what I tell the potential client is, I think you should go talk to Kyle again. Like, maybe we're not making the same assumptions, because even in a best case scenario, Kyle probably shouldn't be 20% of my number. Right now, like, I don't know, maybe Kyle has some like magic potion he keeps in a chest in his office or something, but like, we know, right? And so here's what I tell surveyors, like, and clients, like, getting under contract for a price that is a third of what it's really going to take, is that going to turn out well for anybody involved in the project? No. You know what usually happens in that situation? A lawsuit. Like, that's what usually happens, right? And so what you want to be able to do is you just want to be able to do some rough order of magnitude ballpark math and just say, like, is this even feasible for our business? Now, look, my cost structure isn't the same as Kyle's cost structure. Kyle's going to have a lower cost structure than me. He's got, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people, and I have 20. And that's okay. But you should be able, I mean, fundamentally, to survey 9 miles of right of way, like, Kyle shouldn't be 20% of my number for that. He just shouldn't, right? He might be 75 or 80, but he shouldn't be 20%, right? And so that's why this, like, when somebody calls you and says, I got a great deal for you, Kyle. I got as many utility poles as you can fly in Southern California for $5 a pole, right? Like, what you want to be able to do is do some napkin math and be like, yeah, that might not be as great of a deal as this guy is making it sound like, right? You can just gut check that, right? Like, we figured out that guy basically needs, like, here's what's crazy. if we take Kyle's number of $100 a pole, if you go back to that first example, like that guy's not a little low. He's not half. Like a good price for that work is 20 times what he proposed to pay. 20 times. Now here's the question, the burning question I have in the back of my mind, and I haven't asked him, like, did he find somebody to do this work at $5 a pole, gentlemen? I don't know. Like, how's that going to work out? Is he going to did he sign a contract to do 1 million poles at $5 or $10 a pole? And if so, like, how does that pan out? Like, does he just stop performing on the contract and hope that the client goes away? Does he get sued? I'm like, look, I can't just blame this person. I gotta blame the utility company. Like, why didn't somebody at the utility company do this math? Right? Like, if I worked at the utility company, I'd say, all right, what's a reasonable price to fly 1 million poles? It's not $5 a pole. That's probably my guess, right? So to some extent, the client deserves the result that they're going to get, right? Because they weren't even in the baseball stadium. So there you go. That's almost 45 minutes on just some. We didn't even get to the third example I wanted to do. I did. We had another client call. We won't do the math, but they wanted us to fly. They wanted us to do hydrographic surveys on like a 2,600 acre lake reservoir. And so, like, you know what I'm doing is like I'm calling some people and figuring out like how many knots can we run the hydrographic UAV at, like what's the max speed and how does that affect your data quality, and I'm like figuring out, all right, how many rows do I got to fly to get a 50 by 50 spacing grid, and how many miles is that, how many knots are in a mile, and then how many days. And you know what, we did the math and we're like, man, best case scenario to do that lake with the fastest hydrographic drone I could find. Multi-beam sounder, 2,600 acre lake. Like, I got 2 guys on a boat for 4 months. That's just the math, guys. Like, right? And like, you know what, the client was like, oh, well, we thought this was going to be $75,000.
Inside too, I'll just cheese.
Right? And it was prevailing wage. If you're in California, you know what prevailing wage is like.
Put a little bit in there.
You know what I told the client? I was like, you don't have the budget to do this hydrographic survey. I'm sorry. It's a 2,600 acre reservoir. Like, order of magnitude. You guys are like, take your number times 10, and then maybe we've got a budget that we can work with, right? So, this might get more important too if like Kyle, as his business matures, he'll start taking on bigger projects probably, right? And so you need to be able to, you just got to be able to do some order napkin math. Part of the reason that's important is because people will call you and ask you to do stuff for crazy pricing, right? So you got to just be able to gut check some basic pricing. So, all right, I'm gonna wrap it so you guys can eat dinner. There you go. There's the very first charting the Northwest Passage. I don't know, Kyle, what'd you think? Was any of that helpful?
It's helpful. It's just such a different, like you said, realm that I work in. I'm, and I think probably a lot of people starting out will be at a more residential level, right? And so
Sure.
my numbers, take a 0 off of every one of them because, and for instance, my example would be like 2 months ago, I had somebody who wanted me to do a parcel map, tentative parcel map and parcel map combo. And I said, hey, I looked at it, simple little property. I think it'd be probably about like 15 grand, something in that range.
Right.
And I heard back that, hey, these other guys, they can do it for about like half. Are you sure? And I was like, they must be missing something from their contract. Sure. There's something. And like, yeah. And I was like, hey, can you send me that? Because I don't understand. Like, I'm usually close.
Yeah.
And it's a larger company, like a, civil and engineering firm. And they were coming in the whole thing for half of what I did. I called up a surveyor I know who works there. He's like, that's crazy. We're going to lose money on this. And I was like, yeah, you are. Like, have fun. Yeah. But I told the client, I was like, take the deal. You're going to, that's a steal. They're going to lose a lot of money, helping you out. And I don't know why, but
all right. That's a good example, Kyle. Here's what we'll do. Nick wants to talk about delegating. I'm going to do that next Tuesday, but the third Tuesday, what we'll do for a topic is we'll just talk about like how do you price or how do you scope and reasonably price minor subdivisions, parcel maps? Because we do almost no final maps here. I shouldn't say final maps. We do almost no what we call in California subdivision maps, which are 5 lots or more. Almost everything we do is what we call a minor sub, so it's 4 lots or fewer, and that just is because we're like Kyle. So, anyways, Kyle, we do a ton of those. I look at a ton of those, and here's what I we'll get into this more in a couple weeks. But what I tell surveyors, surveyors consistently lose their rear ends on minor subdivisions, like they're financially. I mean, I know because I've got a couple buddies that do them, and they're always telling me how they lose money on it, and that's because in California there's a lot of uncertainty into how some of that subdivision process goes. And surveyors don't price that properly. And so you know what, Kyle, we'll do a 45-minute session just on like, all right, what's the basic subdivision process in California, and how do you phase stuff so that you don't lose your rear end. That you don't lose your rear end. And one of the really important things too is you got to have a conversation with your client about who's handling a lot of the project coordination and land use planning that goes with the minor subdivision map. Because what happens is it may be, Kyle, that price that your potential client got from that other company didn't include a lot of the coordination with the title company and review of conditions of approval and back and forth with the agency. And like somebody is going to end up unhappy there, right? Like either the surveyor is going to be unhappy that the client's asking them to do that work and they don't think it's in scope, or the client's going to be unhappy because the surveyor is going to tell them, we're not looking at your conditions of approval, and the client's like, yeah, but you told me you were going to do a minor subdivision, right? So anyways, that's a good topic. We'll do that a couple weeks out. We'll just talk a little bit about how we try and handle some of that. And I don't think your numbers are crazy, Kyle. I tell people in California to get all the way through a parcel map. I don't care where you're at or what your land looks like. You got to plan on somewhere between $25,000 and $50,000. That's everything. The agency fees, the title company fees, my fees. And I tell people like, look, if you don't have 25 grand, don't even start that process.
In El Dorado County, most people in the area will say it's typically closer to 80. I mean, and
yeah, that's a little tougher. That's a little tougher.
There's a court case now. There's a court case now,
Yeah.
Supreme Court case because of that. So
yeah. So anyways, that's a good topic. So all right, Kyle, thanks for jumping in. Kurt, appreciate. I know you had your camera on. Thank you. I'll get the website up. We'll get this
thank
posted.
you.
And so next week we'll talk about what do you delegate, when do you delegate, and what do you delegate. It's a hard question. Do you delegate admin first, or do you delegate entry level CAD work, and how do you make that decision? I don't know that I have an answer to that question, by the way, but we can talk about some trade offs. There's certainly some trade offs there. So, okay, guys, thank you. Have a good night, huh?
All right. Thank you.